welcome back to Bumblebee, my friends, where today's video we're going to cover the top 10 most haunted places in history. Since there is so many haunted places and everyone defines a haunting differently, I thought it'd be cool to cover the 10 places that their respective countries consider to be their most haunted places. So let's travel the world, starting with the castle that has the folks saying no. Is Castle of Good Hope in South Africa. It's one of the country's oldest colonial buildings, built in the 17th century by the Dutch East India Company. Originally, it served as a replenishment station for ships passing the treacherous waters of the Cape. It's only 2 centuries later that the first haunting is reported. A tall gentleman in 1915 with unnaturally long limbs scaling the castle walls. He wasn't seen again until 1947, at which point homeboy was prancing through the gardens literally twice a week, when he wasn't Spider-Manning off the palace walls again, that is. One of the most popular stories associated with the castle involves the former governor Pieter Geldspaert van Noort, who sentenced 7 soldiers to death and was warned by one if Pieter didn't attend the execution, he would meet a worse fate. Pieter chose not to show and was found dead later that day, slumped over his desk with a look of terror frozen on his face. There's also the lady in grey, who sprints through the castle in a ball gown TikTok style, sobbing into her palms as she does. However, when a woman's skeleton was found during recent excavations in the last few years, her ghost actually stopped being reported. There's also tales of black hounds that leap at you before disappearing, the lost souls of those dragged down to the Donkergat, a windowless dungeon where many were imprisoned and tortured, and the 17th century soldier found dangling from the bell rope in the bell tower, which was sealed off after his death but will still chime of its own accord to this day. A super weird story of royalty and the battle for a crumbling lodge. Malcha Mahal of Delhi. Malcha Mahal is known as undoubtedly one of the most haunted places in India. The story dates back to the time of India's freedom, when the Malcha Mahal had lost all its glory. Begum of Oud, Princess Wilayat Mahal, found a unique way to protest. Nawab Majid Ali was disposed, and his property was seized by the Britishers. Wilayat then arrived in the 70s with her 2 children, 7 servants, and 15 ferocious dogs, and started the fight with the Indian government for their property back by confining herself and her children to a VIP lounge in the New Dalai railway station for 9 years in protest. At that point, the government just wanted her out of there, so they offered her the Malcha Mahal, which was falling into disrepair, consumed by the forest around it, and full of lizards and snakes with no windows, doors, or power. This type of living condition would have had an adverse effect on everyone, especially paired with the social isolation from the outside. When Wilayat died, her kids couldn't bury her body for a while, and they lived with her for 10 days. And since people had the belief that the Mahal had hidden treasures, they attacked it and the family on numerous occasions, and even dug the Begum's grave back up. Her children then burned their mother's body as a result. The Wilayat Mahal died in 1992, allegedly after swallowing crushed diamonds. Sakina, her daughter, passed a few years later. Until the afternoon of September 3rd, 2017, not many had entered the lodge ever, and then the palace's last resident, Ali Raza, was found dead. It's believed that the tampering and disrespect of the Begum's corpse from burglars, as well as the rumored way in which she died and the treasures that may be hidden, feed the myth of the Mahal's curse, as does the moans and lights seen from it at night. Featured on Nat Geographic's I Wouldn't Go There, Maybe You Would, Tok Tok School in Hong Kong. And if you said yes, you are nuts, because more times than not, this nightmare factory is identified as the most haunted school in Hong Kong. It's often called the most haunted location in all of Hong Kong. In truth, the school operated with no violent or tragic incidents while open, although it's unclear why they closed it, which was in early 1998. However, the rumor was that the school headmistress had taken her own life in the girls' toilets while wearing a red dress. While this is often described to be an urban legend, there was actually some documentation by police around this time, but I don't really know. Anyways, in Chinese culture, when you take your life while wearing red, it means you will return as a ghost within 7 days. So homegirl pretty much guaranteed she'd be hanging out for an eternity at a middle school. And apparently she has been. In 2001, a group of high schoolers went to explore the school, ended up hysterically and emotionally disturbed when one of the girls that went seemingly entered an episode of psychosis, attempting to take her own life and attacking the students who tried to help her. This event also has a police report, and students were taken to the hospital, many of which kept blaming the woman in red for this incident. And beside the school, there's also a large cemetery which contains the remains of massacred villagers who resisted the British colonization of Hong Kong in 1941, and many believe this to be the source of some reported hauntings. Some cabbies even refuse to take the road that leads up to the school, which is surrounded by graves and also reportedly haunted on its own. Overall, people describe migraines, anxiety attacks, psychosis, aggression, cold spots, orbs, and lots of noise echoing in this once lively but now haunted structure. In Indonesia, we'll meet the Dutch demons at Lawang Sewu. Translated, it means 1,000 doors, and that's not inaccurate. This place could have one of those Scooby-Doo scenes where they're all crossing through doors and coming out on random sides of the same hallway. But seriously, look at this beauty. Feels like a romance novel. It's built in 1917 by the Dutch East India Railway Company, and when the Japanese occupied Indonesia, this was one of the buildings they took over. While occupied by the Japanese, it's said that the B building's basement was their prison and execution chambers, and it's now believed that a kuntilanak, a type of vampiric ghost lady, thrives off the despair that resonates there, coming out at night for victims. When the Dutch retook the Semarang in October of 1945, struggle ensured and numerous Indonesian soldiers were killed, as well as 5 employees. These spirits now walk the properties without their heads. Dunia Lane Ghost Hunters show visited this location in 2003, and the episode can be found on YouTube. It's genuinely horrifying. Screeches can be heard as well as banging, and an apparition is caught on camera even interacting with the host. This is a private TV station that it actually aired on in Indonesia, so many argue that the footage is likely not doctored, as it wasn't published for the point of universal fame, rather for cultural interest. So obviously, despite efforts by the government to rebrand the building's image, it is still considered a hub for the supernatural. In hot and sunny Montego Bay, Jamaica, there is the White Witch of Rose Hall. She's Jamaica's most famous ghost, garnering visits from ghost hunting TV shows like Ghost Adventures, but also depictions in TV, books, and movies. According to urban legend, Annie Palmer's parents died of yellow fever, and she was raised by a Haitian nan taught her witchcraft and Haitian voodoo on the Rose Hall plantation. This would have been like fine for her to have as a hobby if she didn't also have a violent streak and sociopathic tendencies. See, Annie blew through 3 husbands, each respectively dying from knife, poison, choking. She also tormented and executed those who disobeyed her, and used her position of power to force male slaves to be her lovers. They refuse, she executes them, but once they agree, she cries wolf and sees them executed anyways. If that isn't heinous enough, she was rumored to steal the bones of her plantation workers' past babies. Annie is only stopped in legend by a more powerful shaman, Taku, who avenged the curse that she had placed on his son-in-law. Taku ends her with a combination of black magic and, well, his hands, and Annie is sealed in her crypt under a curse, one that goes wrong and instead locks her spirit into the hall. So Annie remains haunting the home. People have witnessed her riding horses or on the balcony, and women, especially those of color, report that she seems to be quite an ass to them, pinching and pulling. Guess she's jealous. For a name somehow more ominous than the building, the Black Palace of Mexico. Once one of the most formidable prisons in the country, it earned its reputation long before it held important pieces of Mexico's history. Now, the Black Palace continues to stand as an important government building, but when it first opened its doors in 1900, it was a prison that took little time to gain negative image. Corruption allowed this prison to be a dumping ground for political prisoners or innocent people. Famine and disease ran rampant. Death, whether from environment, their own hands, or other prisoners, was not uncommon. It's easy to see how this environment could harbor enough energy to create a ghostly atmosphere, and there's been plenty of reports from staff and visitors alike. One of the most common experiences is to hear the deafening screams of what can only be described as former prisoners in pain or enduring torture. But one story is what makes the Black Palace so famous. Inmate Don Jacinto, who walks the cell blocks at night repeating to himself again and again, Amelia didn't come. Amelia was his love, who somehow betrayed him. Different stories, different betrayal. She cheats on him and frames him for a crime, or she dies, or he's the reason she's dead. No matter what crappy thing she did, though scorned by Amelia, his love for her seems to have prevailed through his life at the jail and into his afterlife. The Black Palace can be visited by the general public who are interested in learning more about citing some of the most important documents in Mexico as part of the National Archive. One thing you can say about Banff, Alberta is at least you perish with a scenic view, especially at Banff Springs Hotel. Built over 125 years ago by the Canadian Pacific Railway as a luxury resort stop for those happy families, wealthy couples, and needy businessmen traveling the train. It's as picturesque as all of this Canadian region is. Snow-peak mountains, tall, deep green firs against a clear sky. But don't let that fool you though, it's rumored to be one of the most haunted places in the country. Terrifying reports include that of a bride in 1920 whose ball gown caught on fire from a candle and in her panic fell down the staircase, breaking her neck. Her apparition's being seen on the stairs and in the ballroom dancing, with her dress still aflame. The main ghost ghost story is of room 873, where an entire family was killed. The door to this room has since been bricked up after years of people complaining they were terrorized in the suite, but the family that lost their lives in this room are often still seen to this day bloodied standing in the hallway outside of it. But the most common of all reports is the former bellman Sam McCallie. He served at the hotel during the 60s and 70s and is still seen today. He likes to help guests up to the room dressed in his 60s uniform, often turning on lights and opening locked doors. If you try to make a conversation or tip Sam, he'll vanish. A forest you wouldn't want to be lost in is the Black Sea of Trees, Japan. It's very popularly known by one name, but I'm sticking to the whole sea of trees thing. The forest is filled with beautiful lush greenery and a dense landscape that blocks out even the brightest sun rays, creating a consistently eerie atmosphere of quiet and soft darkness. It seems Fae-like, the perfect set for a forest fantasy novel. In my mind, it's not hard for a place like this to be tainted and steeped in misery or mystery. These types of forests feel like a third realm, and the things that happened here only fed that. Historically, it's set in periods of famine during the feudal era. People would bring their family members to the forest that they could no longer afford to feed and leave them there to starve to death, a practice called ube. It was said that the souls of those who starved were unable to move on and populated the forest, taking anyone living who comes along in with them. Consequently, many locals stay far away. Later in 1960, the reputation of the forest was revitalized upon the release of Kurojakai, written by Shichu Matsumoto, that ends with two lovers dramatically taking their lives in the forest. 1993 novel The Complete S-Death Manual by Wataru Tsurumi is a hella controversial, and it talks of ways to take your own life. It mentions this forest as the perfect place. In Japanese mythology, it's said that the Sea of Trees is haunted by demons, and those who enter the forest will never return. Due to the density of the tree, many hikers do in fact lose their way. And moreover, due to the magnetic iron in the volcanic soil, compasses and mobile phones have been rendered useless on these lands before. The Japanese believes any person who dies with a deep sense of hatred, sorrow, anger, or desire for revenge cannot pass over into the afterlife and will thus become a ghost. This belief is continued today and is evident even in body retrieval practices made by forest volunteers. In Barbados, we enter a crypt of mysteries, the Chase Vault. Christchurch Cemetery in Ostentines, Barbados was the site of a string of unusual events in the early 19th century inside the Chase Vault. The first member buried there was Mary Chase, only a baby. She died in 1808 and was buried in a heavy metal casket. Shortly after, teenage daughter Dorcas Chase is buried in 1812 after she intentionally starved herself to death. Then Colonel Thomas Chase himself dies, taking his life, and was also buried in a heavy metal casket. So heavy it took several men to carry. It's noticed then that Mary's heavy casket had moved from its original spot, but not much attention's given, and the vault was sealed again. The claustrophobic vault is then bought by the Warlands family, because you can just buy other people's dead bodies and put your family in with them too back then. And when the new family cracks it open for 2 burials in 1816, all the coffins had been thrown around the room. The seal of the vault hadn't been broken, and a woman who had visited a grave at the Christchurch Cemetery claimed she'd heard terrifying sounds coming from inside of it when she passed recently. This pattern repeats in 1819 when the vault is open for another burial, and it's determined to see if someone was breaking it. The governor himself, he presses his signet ring into the wet cement so if anyone does, they'd notice. 1820, the tomb is opened for the final time. The signet ring's mark is still clearly seen in the cement. No one had tampered. The sealed door to the vault was the only way in, and it was stuck shut from the inside. The colonel's coffin was now blocking the inner door. The governor had enough. He had all the coffins removed from the vault and reburied in different locations, and the tomb has been empty and sealed ever since. They call it the King of Czech Castles, Zvikov. The castle starts as a manor, and over the centuries it's expanded to the fortified behemoth you see now, finished in 1597. It also happens to be one of the weirdest castles in Europe. Stones used to build the Zvikov castle come from ancient Bohemia by the strange ruling invaders, the Marcomannis, and are carbon dated to the 1st century AD. When Zvikov was constructed in the 16th century, these stones were brought from ruins throughout the land. Naturally, this sets it up to be a weird act play. Centuries of strange experiences are recorded, like fires started at random, electromagnetic fields wreaking havoc. Some paranormal sources point to the fact that Zvikov was built to house spirits to serve as a form of defensive system for the building. The ancient stones serve as a type of ancient magical cage to keep in various spirits from escaping. After a few centuries of being bored at a job you don't want, I can imagine being a bit of a nightmare there. The most popular lore associated with the castle is of a Slavic imp, famous for carrying out mischief such as ambushing or poking or tripping visitors, moving objects, blowing out flames, or even appearing as a diminutive troll-like apparition. An ominous tale is that the imp can cause disease and death, and anyone who spends the night in the castle will invariably die within a year. Don't forget the ghostly woman in white, or the demonic hounds with fire-red eyes that run the hidden tunnels of the castle. So yeah, it's all bad. This place really has you playing Dodge a Ghost. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I'm so glad you enjoyed. Be sure to like and subscribe for more of this creepy crawly content, and I'll see you next time.